After nearly 7 weeks of waiting, we finally got the news about who will be the Toronto Raptors' next head coach, and Darko Rajakovic. He ended up getting the selection, so congratulations to him, but this is huge for the Toronto Raptors right now at this point. When you look at the current state of our franchise, the directions that we could go, Rajakovic could have a serious impact in terms of where this team is going to sort of blossom into in the coming season. So we'll break down his resume, we'll break down what sort of philosophies he has coming into this team, and what this means for the actual direction of the franchise going forward, whether we're going to rebuild, tank, whatever's going to happen. So before we dive into that, we got to see the Woj report that kind of came out and shocked me today. I was driving on the way to basketball, news came out, hit that the Toronto Raptors are finalizing a deal to hire Memphis Grizzlies assistant coach Darko Rajakovic as the franchise's next head coach. Now, we discussed him as a potential candidate in a couple of videos ago, but this was a big shock to me. I'm not going to lie. I thought Sergio, especially with reports saying the Raptors might wait till June 23rd to have another in-person interview with Sergio Scariolo, right? I thought he was definitely going to get it. I'm not going to lie. I said it on a recent video, but we did see Rajakovic enter the race as of late in terms of all the reports, everything that was going on. Charles Lee was also a name that Woj came out and said was a potential candidate and could have potentially filled in there. Kenny Atkinson was a guy. Zydrunas Jasikevičius. If we do lose the next head coach, right, in the direction, I wouldn't mind Jasikevičius and his animated sideline antics coming in and being the coach of the Toronto Raptors. But I think this was a great decision for the Toronto Raptors. And Woj breaks down a little bit more about this guy. Basically, Rajakovic, a native of Serbia, emerged out of an exhaustive Toronto Raptors process to sell Raptors president Masai Ujiri and general manager Bobby Webster on his candidacy to replace Nick Nurse. The Serbian native had been a G League head coach and an assistant with the Oklahoma City Thunder, and had a stop with the Phoenix Suns on his way to elevating into a top assistant coach for Taylor Jenkins with the Memphis Grizzlies. So, he's had a pretty significant resume. Just taking a look at it all here, had some experience coaching over there in Europe, then was the head coach of a D-League team, the Dulce 66ers, before the league was called the G League, and didn't set the world on fire with the 66ers in his real main tenure as an actual head coach. Obviously, he's been a long-time assistant. Or you look at his sort of standings there, 27 and 23, 24 and 26. It's hard to really gauge win-loss performances in the G League as players are coming up and down and all that sort of stuff, but at least was respectable in his last tenure as an actual head coach. But looking at the resume, right, then went to OKC for 5 seasons, coached those Russell Westbrook, KD squads. KD left kind of halfway through that tenure, but, lots of talent on those squads, lots of wins. Then 2019-2020, coached the Phoenix Suns, and that was the year that the Suns really turned it around, because they're basically post the Steve Nash era. The Phoenix Suns were hot garbage, and then 2020, they had the bubble season, and they shocked the world in the bubble, and obviously now they made it the finals and did this. So Rajakovic was on the bench for that sort of turnaround, but probably the most impressive stint on his resume was with the Memphis Grizzlies as an assistant coach, because he was regarded as one of the top development guys for that squad, for the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, if you've been watching this Memphis Grizzlies team, they are a deep squad. Obviously, Ja Morant is the big name on that team. That was a top pick and was expected to be good, but the reason they've been a top team in the Western Conference year in, year out is because they developed a lot of players that complement their star guy in Ja Morant and arguably becoming stars themselves. I mean, Desmond Bane has emerged onto the scene as a late first-round picked right immediately after Malachi Flynn. Emerged on the scene for the Memphis Grizzlies, an absolute monster for that squad. Jaren Jackson Jr. was a lottery pick as well, but has developed very nicely there with the Memphis Grizzlies. And then they have a multitude of role players, whether it be over this past 3 seasons, that have grown and really allowed this team to become the top team in the Western Conference, at least in the regular season for a couple of these years, right? Whether it be Melton, who ended up going to the Sixers, right? Tyus Jones, who's taken his game to the absolute next level with the Memphis Grizzlies, Aldama, right? Guys are just kind of coming out of the blue, right? Brandon Clark before he went down with his Achilles injury, Xavier Tillman, right? There's a lot of names that have become successful development stories with the Memphis Grizzlies over the past 3 seasons. And apparently Rajakovic is a guy that played a big hand in developing these young players into actual legit rotation players in the NBA. And apparently that's a big calling card for Rajakovic. He's a guy that's really open to having every single player on the team get some run, get some opportunities throughout the season, and giving them actual responsibility, right? Coming in, playing defense and stuff. It's a part of his coaching philosophy if you listen to a few of his interviews and the stuff that's going on. So that's a big sort of change up in terms of what the Toronto Raptors have had in recent seasons, where, it was meme to death, the Nick Nursery, where players would go to sort of rot on the bench and have their careers just kind of ceilinged, right? A little glass ceiling over their heads. So having the opportunity for some of the younger players to get that development, because guys like Precious Achiuwa, hopefully if Gary Trent Jr. is coming back, Delano Banton, right? Lots of potential for some of these young guys. And sure, they didn't show it tremendously under the most recent seasons, right? We would have liked to see a little bit more of leaps from those guys. It'd be nice to have a coach that really can grow those players and the players that we expect them to be, the guys that are Masai Ujiri is drafting. So get back to sort of the Dwayne Casey development era where we had G Leaguers like Norman Powell, DeLon Wright, Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, Chris Boucher. All those players kind of came in through the Raptors system and became legit NBA guys. So if we get back to that as a Raptors organization, that will be huge. And also a part of his philosophy that is very different from former head coach Nick Nurse, is not a lot of iso ball for Rajakovic. Is a guy that's come out in interviews and directly said he likes the pace and space, shouldn't be holding on to the ball for more than 0.5 seconds. That's a quote from him. Now, that might be a little bit too crazy. We do need some drives, especially with talented players and stuff. But if you're, it's going to be a nice aesthetic change for Raptors fans because, sure, the iso ball is fun when they're actually scoring. When we're winning games, we can see some big numbers put on the board. You have a Kawhi Leonard on your roster, right? But when we kind of have the team that's as currently constructed, it'd be nicer to see an aesthetically pleasing basketball, especially with a guy like Scotty Barnes, who could be one of your lead stars going into next season. His feel for the game, ability to facilitate and these types of things. Rajakovic might be the perfect coach to come in and coach Scotty Barnes. So that's a huge thing for this team, for this development of Scotty, especially our young guy that requires the most development as he has the highest ceiling, highest potential. But what does this mean for the Toronto Raptors going into next season in terms of direction and the player personnel they're going to bring back into the start of this coming season? And Woj also broke some of that down in his article, breaking down the hiring of Rajakovic, saying that the Raptors wanted a coach whom they believed could coach a contending team should the franchise stay on its current path with veterans or a rebuilding roster, should they eventually transform the team into younger players and draft assets, according to sources. So the Raptors still don't have their minds made up in terms of whether or not they're going to go the developing route or try to retool this squad, keep Fred VanVleet, keep Gary, I'd imagine, OG, and try to run it back and have the success we had 2 seasons ago. And I get it. Wait for the offers. Make the decision when you see, the moves that could potentially be made, that could be on the table. But Rajakovic, it's nice to know that he's going to be able to do both, or at least the franchise believes in his ability to win games and also develop a roster. Because we've seen a lot of coaches across the league be plagued as more development guys. Take young rosters, grow them, mature them, and then, once they become a team with expectations, the coach, sure, they're great at developing, building a culture and all these types of things, but crumble under the pressure come playoff time in terms of making adjustments, making the right calls for a team, to win actual games. So the franchise expects him to be good on both ends of that spectrum, regardless of what direction they go in, right? Even if they go in that younger direction, it'd be nice if he could come in, develop a young group, and then win with that group. That's just something that's ideal in a candidate that you want to select, especially with where the Toronto Raptors are at currently in their timeline as the players they got on this roster. But definitely exciting news. This is huge for the Toronto Raptors at this point. Definitely looks like a massive W, even though Sergio would have been a cool pick. Kenny, lots of good names on the table, but I think they picked a good one in Darko here. But let me know what you guys think about this selection. Subscribe to the Raptors Digest if you want to stay up to date with everything surrounding the Toronto Raptors. And anyways, you guys are the best. I'm signing out. Cheers.